It was just another Tuesday afternoon in the crowded subway car when 17-year-old Jamal Thompson noticed her. A pregnant woman, her face pale and sweaty, gripping a metal pole like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The seats around her were packed with commuters staring at their phones, pretending not to see her swaying with the rhythm of the train. Jamal didn't hesitate. He stood up, nodded toward the empty spot and said, "Ma'am, take mine." The woman, clutching her swollen belly, looked at him with a mix of relief and something deeper, a flicker of surprise, maybe even guilt. She thanked him quietly, but as Jamal moved to lean against the doors, he couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes kept darting back to him, like she was memorizing his face. What he didn't know? That simple act of kindness was about to unravel a chain of events neither of them could have imagined. Meanwhile, across town, U.S. Army General Marcus Hayes, a man who'd led battalions in combat zones, earned medals he never bothered to display, was being shoved against the hood of his own car, handcuffs biting into his wrists. The police officer, his face flushed with a mix of adrenaline and something darker, barked orders as curious onlookers filmed the scene. "You think your uniform makes you special?" the cop sneered, ignoring the military ID Hayes had calmly offered moments earlier. The general's voice stayed steady, practiced, but his mind raced. How many times had he warned his own sons about this? Keep your hands visible, don't argue, survive first. Now, here he was, in broad daylight, reduced to a hashtag waiting to happen. Back on the train, the pregnant woman rummaged through her purse, her hands trembling. She pulled out a pen, a crumpled receipt, and scribbled something down. When the brakes screeched at the next stop, she pressed the note into Jamal's palm, her eyes glistening. "Read it when you get home," she whispered. The paper felt heavy, like it held more than just words. But before he could ask questions, she disappeared into the crowd. As for General Hayes, the officer's smug confidence lasted exactly 23 minutes, right up until the police chief's phone rang. On the line, a 4-star general from the Pentagon, her voice ice cold. "You have one of my top strategists in cuffs," she said. "Release him. Now." The color drained from the chief's face, but it was too late. The video was already trending, the headlines brutal. And the cop? He didn't know it yet, but his badge wasn't the only thing he was about to lose. Jamal unfolded the note in his cramped bedroom later that night, his heart pounding. The words blurred as tears welled up. "You don't know me," it began. "But today you gave me more than a seat." But what happened next? The secret that would tie these two strangers together, the explosion of public outrage and private redemption, the moment karma swung like a hammer. Well, that's where the real story begins. Jamal's fingers trembled as he smoothed the crumpled receipt against his knee, the woman's handwriting looping in hurried, desperate strokes. "You don't know me," the note repeated. "But today you gave me more than a seat. You gave me hope that good people still exist. My name is Sarah. I need to tell you something important. Something about the man who's been hurting. Me. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. by the fountain in Grant Park. Please don't tell anyone." The words punched the air from his lungs. Hurting her? Was she in danger? He glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. His mom wouldn't be home from her night shift for hours, which meant he had time to think. But think about what? A stranger's cryptic note? A pregnant woman mixed up with someone violent? Jamal paced his tiny bedroom, the subway's rhythmic clatter still echoing in his bones. Part of him wanted to crumple the note and forget it. The other part, the part that still remembered his older brother's funeral after a stray bullet found him in a drive-by, whispered, "What if you're her only chance?" Across the city, General Hayes sat stiffly in a too-small chair at the police station, his uniform jacket draped over his shoulders like armor. The chief had apologized twice, but the cameras outside the precinct told the real story. Reporters shouted questions about racial profiling, about abuse of power, while the officer who'd cuffed him, a wiry man with a buzz cut and a tattoo, peeking from his collar, avoided Hayes's gaze from across the room. "Internal Affairs is handling it," the chief muttered, mopping his brow. Hayes nodded, his jaw tight. He'd seen this script before, a slap on the wrist, a paid leave, another training seminar. But then his phone buzzed, a text from his wife. "The boys saw the video. They're scared." His throat tightened. 16 years in the military, and this was the battle he hadn't prepared for. Proving to his sons that the world could be better than this. Sarah's hands hadn't stopped shaking since she stepped off the train. She leaned against the cracked plaster of her bathroom wall, the pregnancy test still gripped in her fist. 2 pink lines. Again. Her husband had promised it would be different. This time, promised he'd quit drinking, promised he'd stop yelling, stop grabbing her wrists. But tonight, when she'd asked about the bruises on his knuckles, he'd slammed his fist into the wall beside her head. "You think you can question me?" he'd hissed. "Who's gonna believe you?" The look in his eyes, cold, triumphant, had sent her fleeing to the subway, where a boy with kind eyes had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time in years. Now, scribbling that note felt like throwing a lifeline into the dark. Would Jamal come? Or would she spend tomorrow nursing another lie about falling down the stairs? The next morning, Jamal stood at the edge of Grant Park, the fountains, mist cooling his face. He'd almost talked himself out of coming a dozen times. What did he know about helping some stranger? He wasn't a hero, just a kid who stocked shelves at the grocery store after school. But then he'd remembered Sarah's voice, the way she'd whispered, "Thank you," like it was a prayer. The park was quieter than usual, clouds hanging low and gray. He spotted her sitting on a bench, a floppy sun hat hiding her face, hands clasped over her belly. "Sarah," he said, hesitant. She looked up and Jamal froze. A fresh bruise bloomed along her jawline, purple and angry. General Hayes's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets, fellow officers, even the mayor's office. He ignored them all, scrolling instead through the body cam footage someone had leaked online. There he was, calm and composed, hands raised as the officer, Officer Riggs, the screen identified, yelled, "Stop resisting!" When Hayes hadn't moved an inch. The comments section was a war zone. Typical thug in uniform. He should have complied faster. Hayes closed the app, his chest heavy. But then an email notification popped up. A message from an anonymous account. "You're not the first person Riggs has targeted. Ask his ex-wife." Attached were 3 grainy photos. Riggs at a bar shoving a woman into a car. The timestamp. Read 2 years ago. The woman's face was blurred, but her posture, shoulders hunched, head down, made Hayes's stomach turn. Sarah's coffee sat untouched between them. "His name is Eric," she said, her voice barely above the fountain's splash. "We've been married 6 years. He's a cop. Works in the same precinct as the officer who arrested your general yesterday." Jamal blinked. His general? He hadn't even made the connection. The viral video, the handcuffs, it had all blurred into the noise of his own life. "Eric hates when I talk to strangers," Sarah continued, her fingers worrying the edge of her hat. "But after what happened to that general, I thought, maybe someone would listen now. Maybe you could help me get proof." Jamal leaned back, stunned. "Me? Why not go to the news? Or the police?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "The police? Eric is the police. And the last time I tried to leave," she touched her jaw, wincing. "Let's just say he's good at covering his tracks." Hayes stared at the anonymous email, the cursor blinking in his draft reply. "Who are you? What do you want?" He deleted both questions. Instead, he typed, "Where is she now?" The response came instantly. "Scared, trapped, alive, one for now." Hayes's fingers hovered over the keys. None of this was his fight. He could forward the email to Internal Affairs, block the sender, focus on his own family. But then, he pictured Riggs's smirk as the cuffs clicked shut, the way he'd muttered, "Respect the badge," like a threat. Hayes had spent his career protecting strangers overseas. Could he really ignore someone in danger here, in his own city? Jamal's phone buzzed in his pocket. A news alert. Officer involved in General's arrest has history of complaints. He clicked, skimming the article. Multiple use of force incidents, suspended twice. Ex-wife filed restraining order. A photo loaded. Officer Riggs, scowling in his uniform. Jamal's breath caught. Sarah's husband, Eric, was the same cop who'd arrested General Hayes. The pieces clicked into place, sharp and terrifying. Sarah wasn't just asking for help. She was handing him a grenade. Sarah watched Jamal's face pale. "You understand now, don't you?" she said softly. "Eric's been escalating since the arrest. He's paranoid, thinks everyone's out. To get him, if he finds out I talked to you..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Jamal's mind raced. If Riggs was abusing his wife and targeting innocent people, exposing him could save lives. But how? They had no proof, no allies, just a bruised woman and a kid with a minimum wage job. "There's a storage unit," Sarah whispered. "Under my maiden name. I've been hiding photos, hospital records. If something happens to me..." Hayes stood abruptly, his office chair rolling into the bookshelf. The anonymous sender had gone silent, but the photos burned in his mind. Riggs's ex-wife, Sarah. The name wasn't listed, but Hayes knew a survivor's posture when he saw it. He'd seen it in villages after bombings, in refugees clutching their children. This was his enemy now, not some foreign threat, but a man who hid behind a badge. He grabbed his keys, texting his assistant. "Find me everything on Officer Eric Riggs. Now." As Jamal walked Sarah to the bus stop, she slipped a key into his hand. "Unit 114, she said. "Password for the lock is my birthday, 8/23/93. If I don't call you by tonight..." A horn blared and she flinched. Eric's patrol car idled across the street, his eyes locked on them through the windshield. Sarah's breath hitched. "Go," she hissed, pushing Jamal toward the crowd. "Now." That night, Jamal crouched in the dim glow of his closet, the storage key digging into his palm. His mom's voice drifted through the door. "You okay in there, baby?" He swallowed. "Hard. Just homework," she couldn't know. No one could. On his laptop, he Googled Eric Riggs. Page after page of commendations, charity events, a smiling photo with the mayor. But buried in the results was a Reddit thread. "Cop threatened to arrest me for disorderly conduct after I reported." His speeding. The comments were a chorus of similar stories, all dismissed, all buried. Jamal's finger hovered over the mouse. Unit 114 held answers. But did he really want to open that door? Hayes' assistant knocked, her face grim. "Sir, Officer Riggs's file. There's something you need to see." And in a quiet house on the outskirts of town, Eric Riggs clicked through security camera footage on his laptop, pausing on a frozen frame, his wife talking to a black teen in the park. He zoomed in on Jamal's face, his mouth curling into a sneer. "Gotcha,"